Awesome. Yeah. So great to have you, Allison. We'll have you kick it off. We can start with your intro and then we'll take questions in the end.
Okay, fantastic. I just want to start by saying what an honor it is to kick off this event. It's really important, this kind of gathering, and I've been working in the space for many, many years, and inclusivity was not something that was discussed many years ago. And I'll share that I feel this space is really at a crossroads. I was there in the build out of Web 1 and the build out of Web 2. And I think we've all seen the kind of problems that are created when we don't have diverse voices shaping the space. And I just think it's absolutely imperative with this next, as this next foundational layer is being built out, to really actively and with great intent involve and include so many different voices, and also across disciplines, and to really create something. We have an opportunity for change, and that's what drew me to the space and what really has driven a lot of my work over the last 5 years. And I'll just briefly share how I came into the space, and then I'll share some slides just to center us. But I have been working in emerging tech for almost 30 years, but I do it with a perspective, not of a technologist. I come in from the perspective of social science. I think about how technology changes our behavior, how it changes how it's possible to collaborate or communicate or do things together, how it impacts organizations and societies and cultures. And so when I first understood what the underlying technology of Web3 enabled, blockchain technology, I had this moment where I almost came out of it dizzy, because what I saw was the potential for a technology, should it scale, should it advance, should it mature, that perfectly matched up with what I think of as our various pools of digital discontent. The ability that we have trouble understanding what is true. We have trouble with transparency. We have an inequitable distribution of value on the web. Once we use data, we lose it. And so the fact that this was almost a perfect fit, or it had the potential to be a perfect fit with this, I just found staggering. And it was at that moment that I pretty much dropped everything and started to dedicate myself to learning about the space and trying to understand it. And it's staggeringly complex. And I'd say that over the 5 or 6 years, it's gotten even more complex. And there's a lot of noise in the space, so it's even more difficult to navigate, but absolutely imperative. And I'll share some slides if I have an ability to share slides. Looks like I do. Just to give you a feel for why I think this is so important. And so it really comes down to this. This is a quote that Winston Churchill shared in 1943. And he was talking about how our architecture dictates our behavior. And he was talking about concrete and glass and steel. But I argue that today it's our information architecture that truly shapes who we are. And that's why it's so imperative to understand how what we're building will influence how we act. And I think we've really seen that with where the web is today and some of the many, many challenges that we're seeing from it. And this had been happening for a while, where our digital spaces set our expectations, set our understanding of the world, change the way that we interact. But it's become even more profound. I mean, when this happened and we had this moment in time that has affected every single one of us very personally, it accelerated what I call the great blending, where our physical spaces were very quickly replaced with digital spaces almost overnight. And so the influence of these digital spaces became even more profound on us. And so it's with that context that I want to share a little historical grounding for a moment that changed the shape of everything. And at the time, pretty much almost no one saw it. And it was this. So I don't know how many people on this in this session, this event, have seen this. This is the Genesis block. It's the very first block of the very first blockchain, which was the Bitcoin blockchain. And what's interesting is that in it is embedded a message that gives us a feel and understanding of the intent of the technology. So it was referring to a headline in the Times that morning that talked about a second bailout of the banks. And this was in the backdrop of the financial crisis. And it really illustrated how centralized institutions did not serve the populations, did not serve the people. And so it's very clear that this technology, blockchain technology on which Web3 is based, was developed to circumvent centers of power and to go around that. And so, it's in that setting that this has enabled a new way to shape our digital experiences. And even though so many of us, we're all familiar now with what happened with the Bitcoin blockchain and the fact that this now holds about, depending on the day, $800 billion worth of value that's exchanged and secured by strangers around the globe. When you think about the fact that there's no organization in charge, there are no people in charge, and it's that much value that's being exchanged, it's really staggering. And so that's where the potential is. And I just want to also, as we're kicking this off, I just want to quickly share a definition of blockchain technology. I'm guessing that a lot of people are very familiar with it, but how I think about it is essentially just a ledger. And the difference is that you don't have people like this that you have to trust to keep track of the ledger and what's true. So when I'm looking for a quick definition of blockchains, this is what I think about, where it just helps us certify something that's true without someone in the middle doing checks and balances. And that then takes us to Web3. So how can we use that kind of functionality to change what's possible on the web? And Web3 is a term that is still being defined. So if you're confused about what Web3 is or having trouble grasping the words to describe it, you are in the same situation that people within the industry are. So if you've, if it feels a bit confusing, know that that's where we are. And so how I think about it, my definitions at the top here, I start to think about it and starting to talk about it is this is how consumers actually connect to the benefits of blockchain. So the benefits of that technology that we were talking about. But I've included on this slide a couple other definitions that I really like from others. And so I really love how Gavin Wood talks about it as less trust, more truth. So that's because we don't need to rely on these centralized players. I love how Chris Dixon talks about it, and Packy McCormick. And so these are just some definitions to explore and to think about it as you continue to think about the space. So it's from there that so many, there's so much that gets wrapped up in that description of what Web3 is. And I find that people tend to get confused about, are all these different things that I hear about, how do they relate to blockchain technology and how do they relate to Web3? So I think of Web3 as essentially a wrapper around a bunch of new functionality that's based off of blockchain technology. And so you've heard about all of these. You've heard about cryptocurrency and smart contracts and NFTs and DeFi and DAOs. And know that that's really just the beginning. We'll see so much more that will come out of this that maybe we can't anticipate today, that will be discovered in future years. And these will be tools that we can use to deliver new functionality to the web. And so, for example, NFTs are an area where there has been an incredible amount of innovation. And so we're starting to hear about dynamic NFTs that shift and change based off of new data inputs, or non-transferable NFTs, for example. Or you can think about it in terms of how this kind of functionality is changing what's possible in different industries. So we hear about DeFi, but have you heard about DeSci, decentralized science, and some of the fascinating things that are happening there? So just know that as you see all these terms and they feel at times kind of overwhelming, because each one of these we could spend days and days and days talking about, know that one way to think about it is just that these are wrapped up in a way that we can think about for things that can change the web. And I also want to share with you a way that I kind of order the or call into play the themes that are common to all of these that will impact the way what we can do to change the way the web works. And I think of them, there's sort of 4 elements that I think of, and in a way I think of them as clay. So we can mix and match these or use them in new ways to build something new. And so I want to share this in the hopes that it'll also help you as you go through your journey, as you encounter more, explore more in Web3, that you can think about these elements. And perhaps over the next 2 days, as you're absorbing the event, you can look for these themes as well. So I'll share them with you quickly. So the first one I think of is direct access. So this is the new thing that's made possible because of blockchain technology. And we talked earlier about what that's meant for the Bitcoin blockchain, but really this is being used in every single industry to enable direct access where you can have less trust and more truth, as Gavin Wood referred to. And there's an interesting dynamic here that a lot of people race to conclude that this feature or this theme will mean that we will eliminate middlemen. And I actually don't think that will happen. I think what will happen, middlemen are very important to us, and they happen since the dawn of trade, where we rely on middlemen to move things from low value settings to high value settings, and we will pay for that. And I believe that as the space evolves, it will put a lot of pressure on middlemen, and middlemen will be pressured to deliver more value for the cost. But I do believe there is a large role for middlemen in the space. And I think a lot of what we will see in the space is more advanced and sophisticated and high value forms of middlemen that will help us navigate the space. And if you want to think a little bit more about that, think about if you've interacted with various elements of Web3, you'll understand the friction and the challenging user experience that can be a part of that. And so this is a space where I think middlemen have a huge opportunity. The second one I'll mention is programmable money. And this is it just floors me what this makes possible. So you can think of it also as the kind of functionality we see in smart contracts. But the new thing that all of this, all of these kinds of functionality make possible is the fact that now we can actually inject software-like features into the movement of money. And so money can move, or value can move, based off of the actual code in the money itself. So it's the money or the value can actually dictate how things are moved. And this is absolutely staggering with what it makes possible. And so we can talk more about that if you're interested. The third theme that's exciting and new is digital ownership. So what's, in today's world, it's really difficult to understand without incredible investment in middlemen and intermediaries who owns a specific digital thing, because digital things are easily copied. And so what the space solves for is the ability to copy and reuse a digital good or a digital asset. It prevents what we call double spend. So, if we were at the happy hour in New York today or in San Francisco tomorrow, and I handed you a drink, we would all see that drink went from me to you. But if it's a digital form of a drink, we wouldn't be able to tell. If it was a JPEG of a drink, we wouldn't be able to tell whether that ownership actually shifted. And what this technology enables is to address that. And this, of course, is a really exciting area of innovation, and we hear a lot about it in the media as well today. And then the fourth is data control, and this is one that I find perhaps even the most interesting. But we also don't know enough of where this will go. I think it will be interesting to see how this transpires over the next 5 to 10 years, but essentially the technology enables us as people or as organizations to control the use and the access of data. And so I think over time, what this will create is new expectations for consumers and organizations for how data is managed and handled, and a better understanding of the value of that data. And so I think we're going to see incredible innovation in that space in terms of how that's used. And it's going to change all of our expectations. So with that in mind, with these themes in mind, I want to give you a taster for 3 areas of Web3 innovation that I'm particularly excited about. And I think you'll see these themes a lot as well over the next couple days. And so keep an eye out for them. I want to talk about creator empowerment, decentralized collaboration, and user choice and control. And again, let me share that my perspective is really about how this technology and how a new web can change the way that we act as humans, as societies, as cultures, and as organizations, and what's possible. And so that's why these are areas that are super, super excited for me. And so the first one I'll share is about creator empowerment. And we hear a lot about this. And we see incredible examples of this today. But basically, in today's web, we are all contributing to the value of the network, say a social network or other areas, and yet we don't get value in respect to the amount that we actually are contributing. And so what this technology enables is to assert ownership and can empower creators of all kinds. And so, we hear a lot about that in terms of various NFT projects, for example. That's one great example that's really fun to immerse in, to see how creators can actually dictate the terms for which a digital good is owned or exchanged, and can retain, for example, royalties in the exchange of an NFT, and they can dictate that this will go to, say, a philanthropic organization. So there's all sorts of terms and conditions that can be embedded into that. But also think about how, if I'm somebody, for example, working on Upwork, I pay, or Airbnb, I pay 20 to 30% of my income to the platform. And so if we can have more direct access to networks of people, if we're creating, we can get more value for what we create. And so that's an area that I'm really optimistic about in terms of the kind of development that will happen, and one that I'm watching closely. A second one is decentralized collaboration. And this is an area where I was talking to some leaders in the academic field about various approaches to decentralized autonomous organizations. And we had this sort of magical moment where we were collectively, I'll say, freaking out over the innovation that's happening in the space right now, and how we collaborate and how we organize and how people can align and execute on a shared goal. So blockchain technology allows us to enforce governance and manage shared treasuries and even business processes through blockchain technology, which enables us to collaborate in new ways. And so I would highly recommend, if you haven't already, immersing in what kind of innovation is happening within the decentralized autonomous organization landscape. And when I step back and think about what this will enable, I think about how this is really like a global laboratory that is issuing and learning from rapid experimentation. And so how I've been interested in the space for a while, this particular aspect of Web3 for a while. But when I had this moment where I came home from an event in Barcelona, and I turned on my computer, and I hadn't even unpacked my bags. I hadn't even taken off my shoes, and Twitter came up, and so I was just checking what I had missed. And I heard about what probably a lot of people on this call have heard about with the Constitution DAO. And so this was a DAO that was started by a group of about 7 people who knew each other. They gathered on a Zoom call on a Thursday night, I believe, and divided up work streams and decided to undertake the mission of buying a copy of the US Constitution that was being auctioned off the following Thursday at Sotheby's. And it started off as almost a, could we do this? But by over the weekend, which is by the time I saw it on Twitter, they'd actually started to raise millions of dollars. And by Thursday, the time when the auction took place, so after a week of putting this together, over 17,000 people represented by Unique Wallets had contributed over $40 million to this cause. And I did not sleep that week because I was so fascinated by how this was illustrating new ways to organize and bring together networks of often strangers to make change, to manage a treasury, to start to make decisions. I was completely fascinated. And, if you listened in, I spent a lot of time watching the Discords and participating in the Discords and listening in to live talks as the team struggled to figure out how to interact with the traditional world with this, even how to place a bid as a DAO at Sotheby's. I was also struck by the messiness of this. So we're at a really messy time trying to understand how we use this, how we actually can organize in a decentralized fashion. But this field, I believe, will advance at lightning speed. And so I think in a matter of years, we're going to see incredible impact across the spectrum, across the landscape, across different industries from decentralized autonomous organizations. And I think more and more of us will start to work part-time for decentralized autonomous organizations. So this is a really rich area of exploration, and I encourage you to spend some time in it. And the third one I'll briefly touch on, because I want to make sure we have some time for questions, is about more trace and control. So as we're able to shift control from centralized powers to network communities, it gives us ability to exert control. So for example, when we think about the metaverse, and here's a picture of me dancing in the metaverse with a NFT penguin, I think about how today we can't take our followers with us if we no longer agree with what, say, a social platform like a Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter is doing. In the future, we will have the ability to hold that data as our data, take it with us to new applications and services, and have more portability. So I want to, just before reserving a little time for any questions, I just want to share this quick. It's a dense slide, but I just want to share a little cheat sheet on some things to look for in terms of whether something is Web3 or not. So the questions on the left are some hints on how you can see the difference between Web2 or Web3. And if you want to spend some more time with this chart, I encourage you to, it's on my LinkedIn as I think of a pin post. And so you can check that out. And one other thought before we break is simply that the space is very confusing and overwhelming in the moment, and it will be for some time, but don't dismiss the messiness. We tend to this is Amara, Roy Amara, and Amara's law. I have seen again and again over 30 years in technology where we really overestimate the impact of new technology in the short run. So a lot of the hype cycles that you see are because of that, but we underestimate it in the short run. And this actually happened with Web 1 and Web 2, where people dismissed it and poo-pooed it because it just felt like it would never work. And if you see the quote on this slide, I don't know about you, but I spent pretty much my last 2 years completely living a digital life. And so let's just say that things have changed. So I'll just leave you with some more resources if you're interested. I've got some learning materials on my website. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on LinkedIn, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. So did we want to take some questions?
Yes, so we actually have the Q&A here that everybody can ask your questions there. So one of them is, you talked about decentralized science. Would love to learn more about that and what other new tech you can imagine in the future.
Oh, that's a huge question. So essentially, okay, so one area, there's many areas of decentralized science, but one area I think that's really interesting is pharmaceutical research. So right now, or even food innovation research. So right now we rely on large organizations and their priorities to invest in innovation for food innovation or for pharmaceuticals. And there's an opportunity with the support given by these new technologies and structures to essentially fund new research and collectively own IP outside of a traditional organization. And when I step back and think about why the kinds of things that we just talked about are so important, a big piece of that is that the problems that we face across the globe are more complex and more challenging than ever. And we need more firepower to help solve them. And I feel that we can not only rely on traditional organizations to be able to fund everything that needs to be funded and to tap into all the kind of innovation that all the brain trust across our globe that we need to. So I look at these technologies and these new opportunities as a way to more collectively tap into the true power of our global brain trust and direct financing to where it's needed most. So I know I extended that beyond DeSci, but I think that also addresses the second part of the question in terms of like, where else am I most excited? I also will add in, areas like climate change innovation and other areas like that, I think are another area where this could be extremely interesting as well.
Another one that was asked it came in while you were talking about middlemen, and they asked about how you feel about distributed ledger technologies.
So, okay, so first of all, blockchain technology is not the only technology that can approach some of these challenges. So, blockchain technology has massive challenges in terms of scalability, for example, cost. I've seen incredible innovation over the last couple of years in that, and I think that the investment that is happening in development around the globe in public blockchains makes it a real contender. But I just want to emphasize too that there's many other kinds of decentralized technologies that also support this as well.
Another question that Jillian had was, what do you see as the pitfalls to avoid in Web3? What experiences from the past, say content moderation of platforms that you mentioned, that we now recognize ex post bad, can we watch out for, or is it impossible to know?
Yeah, when you first asked the question, I thought maybe it was a personal question, like what can we watch out? Because we all need to watch out for a lot. There's a lot of scams and bad actors, and we have to all take good care of ourselves, be careful of what links we click on Discord. But I don't think that was the actual question. I think it was more about how do we change some of the huge problems that are underscoring things like social media platforms that we've seen in Web 2. And this is an area I spent a lot of time on. It is incredibly complex, and with any new technology, technology is just a tool. And so when it collides with humanity, we're going to see the good and the bad. And the question that centering on content moderation is going straight to the heart of one of the most complex areas that humanity is facing right now, in terms of how do we balance the ability to speak freely with its ability to also have harm. And it's an amplified version of the conversation around, you should not yell fire in a crowded theater. And so let me tell you so there needs to be a lot of work on this. Let me tell you what I'm optimistic about. That is that today we are reliant on essentially a small oligarchy to dictate how this is done, and to fund all the investment in innovating and understanding how we do it better. What I am optimistic about is the fact that the Web3 movement opens up the opportunity to move from closed systems that are not transparent to ones that are open and more transparent, to which we can all contribute as these fundamental as this core functionality, such as social networking, moves to a Web3 environment built with open source tools. We all have a chance to work on building something better. And so more players can be involved in that. We can have more transparency to how things run. But I do think it's going to be a long and difficult and complex journey, because these digital public spaces go to the heart of how we gather now online. And so it will be a tough, challenging journey ahead, but I'm hopeful.
So there are two questions that are kind of, I know they're related and they're not related, but it speaks exactly to what you were just talking about. In terms of, the first question from Lotus Leaf was, what are your thoughts on the very recent and heavy presence of VCs in the space, community owned or VC owned? And then somebody anonymously asked, DAOs currently aren't decentralized or autonomous. How do you think it might grow in a manner where it's actually a real DAO? And I feel like you just touched upon those points briefly, but I would love for you just to go into a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I love how you link them. There's so much, those are wonderful, wonderful questions. And I think that they deserve a lot of discussion. And so I hope there's forums for that. So let's talk first about VC, and I'll link them at the end. So let's talk about VCs. I'm of two minds of this. So I do think that there's opportunity for investment to come from more players, and we're already starting to see this. At the same time, in order to have innovation, it needs to be funded. And there's large dollars that need to go into the funding. And so I think the VC model needs to shift, and it's starting to. I'm hopeful that we'll get more alternate and diverse forms of capital that are flowing into the space. But the person who asked the question is absolutely right, that like right now, that's a lot of the investment and a lot of the returns are coming from that older model. And so I'd like to see gradual shift, but I also understand why that's the case now. In terms of, and this also brings up the point, as you correctly linked the two, about decentralization. Are things truly decentralized? And decentralization is a journey. And decentralization in and of itself is not a good or a bad thing. In fact, extreme decentralization is actually anarchy. And so we have a lot of work ahead of us to understand, how do we decentralize effectively? What's the right balance? And this goes to the DAO question, where, and we do not have an understanding. And I will posit that this is true of even people leading some of the largest DAOs. We don't really know how to define what a DAO is. A DAO, is it just a Discord? Is it when you have blockchain enforced governance? I mean, I have my own thoughts on it, but that's something we all need to understand more richly, is what actually defines a DAO. And the person who asked the question went really to the heart of some of the challenges. So how much is done in the open, transparently? How much is done behind closed doors? And how much is the community involved? And when do you want the community involved? There's a lot of best practice development that needs to happen. And this is one of the areas in 2022 that I want to spend as much possible of my time learning about, because it's such a rich area of exploration and discovery. And we don't know yet how to do it really well. It's really messy, but the innovation and our ability to intake that innovation and ingest and create better is something I'm really excited about.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alison. That was super informative, really cool talk. Hopefully everyone took away a lot about what Web3 really means. And thanks for everyone for asking questions.